The spiral beneath the silence block 1, a quiet that feels like death. There was something deeply wrong with the way humans slept. The doctor Ellerek had suspected it from the beginning, but suspicion became certainty the moment he saw it with his own eyes. To him, their stillness wasn't restful, it was haunting. No flicker of muscle, no low hum of bioluminescence, no internal rhythm pulsing through the air. Just absence. As if their minds had abandoned their bodies entirely. And still, they called it sleep. Other sentient species across the known spiral arm approached rest with caution. Valari, like Ellerek himself, entered low-activity trance states where higher cognition paused, but vital monitoring systems remained alert. The Jor had cyclical stasis bursts tied to magnetic pulses in their planet's crust. Even the primitive Decathans, large amphibious predators from the Archon cluster, retreated into hibernation with chemical defenses still active in their veins, but humans? Humans surrendered. Fully. Freely. Every single cycle. Ellerek first boarded the human vessel Icarian 9 months ago as part of a scientific exchange between the United Terran Fleet and the Valari Confederacy. As a xenoneurologist, his mission was to observe human cortical responses in long-term space travel. What he didn't expect was to become their only non-human observer, stranded aboard a metal ship drifting silently through Sector Thala 91, orbiting a sunless dead star. He adjusted quickly to their culture, sort of. The strange rituals of verbal teasing, the persistent laughter, the clapping of hands in greeting, the informal defiance toward danger. All this, he could study, catalog, hypothesize upon, but nothing prepared him for the first night. After an exhausting orientation day with Captain Voss and his crew, dozens of human hands clasped in greeting, loud voices echoing in narrow halls. Smells of food too spicy for Valari sinuses, Ellerek retired to his assigned quarters. He expected to find technicians maintaining their stations, voices over comms, the usual thrum of life aboard a vessel in operation. Instead, he found silence. Deep, complete, unnatural silence. The lights had dimmed automatically to night mode, casting everything in faint amber. He wandered the corridors, puzzled. No footsteps. No humming. No laughter. Just the low-frequency vibration of the ship's reactors humming below his feet. He checked the med bay. Empty. The mess hall. Dark. Then he opened a crew cabin and froze. 6 humans lay on bunks and recliners. Limbs tangled, faces slack. Mouths open. One had a half-eaten protein bar lying on his chest, as if he'd passed out mid-chew. Another had a tablet, still glowing faintly beside her, caught in the middle of a sentence. He stepped back. Fear pulsed through his gill spines. He opened the next cabin. Same sight. The third. Same, bodies motionless. Breath so shallow he couldn't detect it at first glance. Heat signatures present, but low. Too low. Lower than any viable function should allow. His mind raced. Could it be airborne neurotoxins? Internal systems failure? Mass cerebral infarction. He didn't stop running until he reached the captain's quarters. The door slid open with a soft hiss. A sliver of emergency light fell over the form of Captain Voss, slumped sideways on a reclining chair, one leg hanging over the armrest. He didn't move. Ellerek's secondary heart pounded. He took a cautious step forward and reached out. Krill, the man mumbled suddenly, groggy. You lost? Ellerek jerked his hand back as if burned. You're awake? Was, Voss grunted, wiping his face. Why are you in my quarters, Doc? I thought you were all, Ellerek struggled. You weren't responding. None of you. Your crew is, they appear, expired. Voss yawned, blinking his one good eye. Nope. Just sleeping. You're lucky you didn't walk in 30 minutes earlier, or I might have drooled on myself. You sleep like that? Like what? Like the dead. That made Voss laugh. A low, raspy sound that seemed to warm the cold air in the room. I guess you've never seen a Terran nap. Welcome to the fleet. Block 2, echoes in the dark sleep. The word haunted Ellerek more with each cycle aboard the Icarian. He began recording human rest patterns obsessively, documenting limb positions, ocular fluttering, fluctuations in core temperature. There were stages, he learned, REM and REM, cycles within cycles. But it was more than that. Something beneath. The biology gnawed at him. After the second week, he requested permission from Voss to monitor crew neural activity overnight. Curious little ghost, aren't you? The captain said, rubbing his stubbled jaw. As long as no one wakes up with a probe up their nose, be my guest. So he did. Ellerek installed non-invasive sensors in common sleeping quarters, cleared with the crew, of course. The humans found it hilarious, teasing him relentlessly with mock snoring and melodramatic collapses into bunks. But they let him proceed. The data was clean at first. Normal variances in wave frequency, occasional spikes from what they called dreams. Most fascinating were the synchronized shifts. Unrelated crew members entered REM within minutes of each other. The exact same minute on some nights, too consistent to be random. One night, Ellerek observed Lieutenant Hannah Kessick murmuring in her sleep, eyes darting under closed lids. Moments later, in a different cabin, Engineer Delgado turned in his bunk and muttered the exact same phrase, "She's standing at the spiral again." Ellerek's gill membranes tightened. That phrase had appeared in neither daily reports nor entertainment logs. A week later, another anomaly emerged. Several crew members, unrelated, from different departments, reported waking with identical impressions: a staircase spiraling downward, walls of shifting black glass, a sound like distant breathing. They weren't speaking in metaphors. They described the same angles, the same oppressive stillness, the same impossible geometry. A place none of them had ever been. Voss laughed when Ellerek brought him the compiled reports. Group psychology, the captain said. Spending months in a tin can does weird things to the mind. But Ellerek knew better. These weren't hallucinations or stress-induced illusions. The descriptions were too consistent, too vivid. And something in the human brain, something ancient, perhaps even self-protective, refused to retain the images for long. The moment they woke, the details began to fade. But not completely. One evening, Ellerek entered the med bay to find specialist June. So? Sketching feverishly on a display tablet. "What are you drawing?" he asked. "I don't know," June said. His eyes were glassy. "It's like it's drawing itself." The shapes on the screen weren't symbols from any known Terran language, nor from Valari, Cyrenaic, or even the glyph logic used by the machine priests of Orlin. They were something else. Curved lines folding into themselves. Spirals. Mirrors. Within mirrors. Not just unfamiliar, unreadable. Unnatural. By the time Ellerek ran a semantic cross-analysis through the ship's AI, June had already erased the image. He claimed not to remember making it, and yet that night, 3 more crew members drew the same pattern. Something was moving among them. Not in the waking world, but through their minds. And it was starting to leave footprints. Block 3, the first descent. It happened to Ellerek for the first time on cycle 143. He hadn't intended to rest. The Lari required only 2 hours of neurotrans per solar rotation, and he had completed his cycle earlier that day. But after reviewing yet another report of synchronized dreaming, this time accompanied by a nosebleed and tremors, Ellerek found himself tired, not physically, not even mentally. But there was a strange weight behind his eyes. A pressure. Like gravity behaving improperly. He dimmed the lights in his chamber. The air purifier whispered in the background, steady as always. He sat on the padded rest stone designed for his physiology and slowed his breath. Trance would come, as it always did, except it didn't. Instead, he slipped into something else. A cold blackness cradled him. Weightless, formless, silent. Then the silence cracked. He was in a corridor. Not one from the Icarian, but similar. Rusted metal and organic dampness clung to the air. Lights flickered without rhythm. A sound like wet fabric being torn echoed behind the walls. Ellerek turned, and found no body beneath him. He was presence only. Thought and movement without mass. A door appeared ahead, marked by a glyph he recognized from the sketches. The spiral within the spiral. He passed through it. Inside was a chamber of impossible size. Floating above an abyss was a figure, luminous, indistinct. Female in outline, but shifting, ever-changing. Her eyes met his, though she had no face. He felt warmth. No, not warmth. Heat. A radiant pulse that moved through him in waves, not just over his skin but within his essence. Something about her stirred an ache in places of his mind he'd never explored. He reached out. She touched him, not with hands, but with memory. Ellerek gasped, breathless, as visions pierced him, colors without name, emotions without anchor, a voice that wasn't voice whispering across time. He felt pleasure, not in the carnal sense the humans so often joked about, but something deeper. A blending. Union. The dissolving of boundary. His identity thinned, his sense of self frayed. And yet, he didn't resist. The sensation climbed, wave after wave, until he shivered, his whole form echoing with vibrations like tuning forks resonating through marrow. The chamber pulsed once, then collapsed into darkness. Ellerek awoke on the floor, sweat covered his skin. His limbs trembled. The air around him buzzed faintly, as if reality hadn't fully returned to normal. He stood slowly, checking his vitals. Everything was elevated, pulse, temperature, hormonal output. But his mind, that was where the real disturbance lived. It felt invaded. No. Not invaded, opened. He didn't sleep again for 3 cycles. Block 4, a voice in every dream. A phenomenon no longer respected boundaries. It had moved beyond isolated reports, beyond whispered accounts between crewmates at breakfast. Now the entire ship was beginning to feel it. And no one could agree on when it had truly started. Lieutenant Vargas, normally the most skeptical of the crew, stood at the medbay entrance in cycle 148, pale and shaking. She whispered my name, he said flatly. No one knows that name anymore. Not even my mother. Ellerek's spines lifted involuntarily. What did she look like? I couldn't see. Just the spiral, and warmth. But it wasn't comforting. It was possessive. The same word had come from June, Keswick, Delgado, even Voss himself in fragmented log entries. Possessive. Ellerek cross-referenced over 90 dream reports. More than 30 of them contained the exact phrase, "She waits at the end of the spiral." Sometimes it appeared in speech. Sometimes carved on walls. Sometimes simply felt, impressed into the dreamer's mind without words at all. Or worse yet, physical side effects had begun to manifest, blood pressure spikes. Elevated stress hormones. Nosebleeds. One technician collapsed during routine diagnostics, eyes wide and darting, whispering the same syllables over and over in a language no one could identify. Ellerek began recording himself during trance. On the 5th night, he awoke to find his own voice muttering into the recorder. It wasn't his native tongue. Nor human standard. Nor any known dialect of the spiral accord, but the tone, urgent, rhythmic, almost liturgical, sent a chill through him. He took the file to Captain Voss. The man was seated in the observation dome, staring at the stars without really seeing them. One eye glinted in the low light, unfocused. She spoke to me again last night, the captain said before Ellerek could explain. You heard the voice too? No. I didn't hear it. I felt it. In my breath. In the space between my ribs. Like she was inside the pause between my thoughts. Ellerek remained silent for a long moment. Do you believe it's a hallucination? I believe something is trying to connect. The captain turned toward him slowly. You ever hear of the mycelium echo? Ellerek blinked. The Valari have folklore, symbiotic dream networks across distance, yes. Right. But those require a fungal tether. Biological connection. We have no such spore systems aboard. I know. But what if this isn't chemical? What if it's cognitive? What if something ancient figured out how to piggyback on neural frequency? Not through wires. Not through flesh. Just thought. Ellerek exhaled slowly. Then we may not be facing a phenomenon. Voss raised an eyebrow. What then? We may be facing an entity. Block 5, patterns in the static. Ellerek dug deeper into the data. The ship's memory cores held every dream report, every biometric scan, every subtle irregularity in the crew's behavior over the last 5 months. He built a temporal map, each account layered against the next like tectonic plates of consciousness, shifting and fracturing. What emerged from the analysis wasn't just repetition. It was rhythm. Every 21 cycles, the dreamscape intensified. More reports. Stronger details. Shared symbols. Spikes in neural synchronicity. Like tides, predictable, escalating. He isolated a day, cycle 154. The next convergence. He alerted Voss, prep whoever's willing, the captain said. Hook up your scanners. If we're gonna make contact, it might as well be on our terms. That night, 7 crew members volunteered for full sensory monitoring. Ellerek configured the medbay for collective dream observation. Each subject was wired with cortical field readers, subdermal resonance gauges, and pulse sync bands. A central interface pulsed with blue light. They slept. Ellerek waited. 30 minutes in, wave activity surged, heart rates aligned. Core temperatures dipped in tandem. Alpha rhythms gave way to theta, then delta, then something else. A shape formed in the data stream. Not a wave. Not noise. A spiral. The sensors began feeding back symbols into the console, glyphs not part of any program Ellerek had installed. Impossible geometries formed in real time. In the center of the spiral, a signature, an oscillation outside any known frequency range, oscillating at 3.7 Hz. It wasn't machine interference. The IT was communication. Ellerek felt his own mind tightening, resisting the pull. Then Keswick screamed. The other 6 jolted violently but did not wake. Only Keswick sat up, gasping, eyes wild and bloodshot. She stared directly at Ellerek. She saw you, she rasped. She knows you. Who? He asked, heart pounding. Keswick trembled. She calls herself. She paused. Blinked. I forgot. I just knew it a second ago. Ellerek helped her breathe, helped her recover, but his thoughts spiraled along with the data. That IT wasn't just the humans anymore. He had begun dreaming too. Block 6, the threshold of unknowing. He didn't set up the sensors that night. He didn't prepare the restraints, or even alert Voss. Ellerek simply dimmed the lights in his chamber, lay down on the rest stone, and waited. He didn't have to wait long. The spiral met him immediately. That he stood not in a ship or a dreamscape this time, but in something older. A temple, maybe. Or a ruin so ancient that memory itself had weathered its edges. Everything was made of polished obsidian, and yet light bled through cracks in the walls like veins of molten silver, and she was there, not waiting. Not approaching, becoming. Her form did not remain stable. Each time he blinked, it shifted. Woman. Child, mist, flame. And yet he knew her. Or rather, the memory of her seemed coded deep into the bones of his species. Something preconscious. Older than names. She didn't speak, but her thoughts came anyway. You open more easily than they do. Ellerek staggered back, not from fear, but from recognition. Her voice had no sound. It pressed into the folds of his mind like fingers. Moving clay, what are you? He asked aloud. What you will become, once the dreaming completes. He wanted to ask more, but his body began to fail him. Not in pain, not in harm, but in surrender. His limbs weakened, not from fear, but from something else. He fell to his knees. The floor pulsed beneath him, warm and humming like skin. She knelt too, her hand hovering just above his chest. You think waking protects you? It does not. The waking is merely a shallower dream. Then she touched him, not physically, but fully. Thought upon thought, sensation upon sensation. A sudden rush of heat climbed through his spine, into his skull, into the very fabric of what made him him. The memory of her presence cascaded through his nerves like liquid fire. There was no pain, but the weight of it bent him inward. He gasped that he should not have felt anything. Valari did not react to cognitive projections with physical response, not like this. And yet his breath was shaking. His chest rose in desperate rhythm. Every molecule of his body was lit with something alien. Not desire, not fear, not even awe, something unnamed. Unmapped. And yet completely real. The sensation didn't fade, it bloomed, his mind trembled under its intensity. He saw himself reflected in her, his memories fractured and rearranged into unfamiliar patterns. The hum of the Icarian. The scent of human food. The eyes of Captain Voss. The drawing June had erased. All returning, but twisted, mirrored, as though glimpsed through water. You will carry me, she whispered. And in time, they all will. Then, silence. Elric awoke not on the rest stone, but on the floor, knees drawn to chest, breath ragged. He was sweating through 3 layers of fabric, his skin glowing faintly with bioluminescent bloom, an involuntary Valari reaction, normally triggered only by deep emotional imbalance. His palms ached. He opened them slowly, and there, drawn in trembling lines of blue light across his skin, was the spiral, block 7. The marks we don't remember. By the next morning, the marks were gone. Elric scanned his palms again and again under medbay spectrography. Nothing. No traces of foreign material. No bioluminescent residue. Not even thermal impressions where the glowing spiral had been. It was as if it had never happened, but he remembered. The shape was etched behind his eyes, pulsing with every blink. A memory without substance. A symbol without source. He thought he was alone in it, until Lieutenant Hannah Keswick entered the medbay hours later with a trembling voice and sleeves pulled tightly over her wrists. I need you to look at something, she whispered. Elric nodded. She hesitated, then slowly rolled back the fabric. On her inner forearm, faded but unmistakable, was the exact same spiral. Drawn in red this time. Not blood, not ink, something in between. As if it had risen from beneath the skin rather than having been applied. Keswick stared at it, visibly shaken. It wasn't there when I went to sleep. It was just part of the dream. Elric didn't speak. He simply extended his own hand and sketched the spiral onto a display pad from memory. Her breath caught. Exactly that, she said. She traced it on the floor. Then it was on me. How did you feel when you woke? She looked away. Hot. Unsteady. Like I'd been hollowed and filled with something else. Not in a painful way. Just foreign. Did she say anything? Keswick shook her head, then hesitated. Not in words. But I felt her. Watching. Waiting. Elric catalogued the encounter. 3 others reported similar marks within the next 48 hours. One on the back of the neck. Another on the sternum. One engineer found it burned into a wall panel above his bunk. He swore he didn't draw it, and then, as quickly as they appeared, the marks vanished again. No evidence. No trace. Just memory. And the rising, unspoken fear among the crew. Captain Voss called a full meeting on Cycle 158. They gathered in the central operations ring, 32 humans and 1 Valari, all of them restless, sleep-deprived, and visibly disturbed. No one joked. No one asked for coffee. The captain stood in silence for a long moment before speaking. You all know why we're here, he said. Something is happening to us. Something old. Something that doesn't ask permission. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I won't order anyone to keep going, he continued. If you want to request cryostasis, you can. If you want to reroute to the research hub in Kalon Drift, we'll make it happen. No one moved. Elric stepped forward. We're already inside it. Changing course doesn't alter the trajectory of the mind. Voss looked at him. So what do we do? Elric met his gaze. We stop resisting. Block 8, eyes closed, doors open. Cycle 160. The day the crew agreed to dream together, Elric called it the immersion. No more passive observation. No more fragmented reports. This time, they would synchronize. 13 volunteers, including Captain Voss himself, connected through a carefully calibrated loop of cortical harmonizers. The goal was simple: dive into the spiral as one mind. Record what they saw, hear what she said. And return, if return was possible. The med bay lights were lowered. The beds aligned in a ring. At the center, Ellerek positioned the resonance stabilizer, its pulse barely audible. A hum-like breath. Like waiting. He looked over each participant, some seasoned officers, some new to deep rotation. All of them afraid. And yet, they remained. Whatever happens, Ellerek said, you are not alone in there. He activated the sequence, they slipped under together, and something opened at first, the same darkness. The same silence, then, music. No, not music. A vibration of memory. A chorus of voices that didn't speak, but understood. The shared dream formed around them, not like a vision, but like a cathedral of mind stuff, walls that breathed, floors that shimmered with patterns only visible from certain angles, and in the center stood her, not as a shape this time. Not as flame or mist, but as presence, encompassing all things. The walls were her thoughts. The floor her breath. The spiral itself her spine. Ellerek felt Voss beside him, not beside in space, but in thought. He felt the captain's confusion, his awe, even his grief. They were fused, all 13. Sharing sensations, layered atop one another like chords in a living symphony, and then, she began to speak. No sound. Just meaning, you've returned. We never knew you, Ellerek responded, though he never opened his mouth. You were part of me once. Before language. Before division. You forgot the spiral. I did not. Visions came, worlds long dead. Civilizations built around the symbol. Temples of sleep. Gateways formed from consciousness alone. A history not taught in archives, but carved in minds. Each human experienced it differently. Voss saw oceans of glass. June saw his childhood home submerged in stars. Keswick walked through a library where the books whispered her name, and Ellerek, he saw a moment he had never lived. A cradle, not of wood, but of silk spun from stars. A hand, her hand, reaching down to lift him from it. Not as a child. As an idea. A promise. The spiral thrummed. You are ready now, she said. To carry me beyond dreaming. One by one, the visions began to dissolve, but they did not wake. With fear this time. Or confusion. They woke with clarity. Hearts pounding. Minds buzzing. The sensation of having been told something impossible, and knowing it to be true. Ellerek opened his eyes last. He looked at the others, and each of them, silently, was already drawing the spiral. Block 9, when waking is no escape. Cycle 161. Not the silence on the ship was different now. Not the hush of sleep. Not the sterile stillness of vacuum. This silence pulsed with awareness. The kind of quiet that follows revelation. That precedes change. Everyone felt it. The 13 who participated in the immersion moved differently now. Their eyes met without words. Their steps aligned, even when crossing different corridors. Voss no longer carried his usual edge of command. His voice was softer, his pace slower. Ellerek spent the next day scanning their vitals again. And again. The readings defied classification, slightly elevated dopamine. Stabilized circadian markers. Reduction in reported anxiety, but also, overlapping alpha and gamma wave bursts, even during wakefulness. Dream state patterns while conscious. This wasn't just psychological. The mind wasn't visiting something during sleep anymore. It was beginning to carry it back. He confronted Voss privately in the navigation bay. You're still dreaming, Ellerek said, watching him closely. Voss nodded without hesitation. Even with my eyes open. Is it invasive? No. It's like remembering something I never knew I lost. Ellerek hesitated. And the others? They say the same. She's still there. Not always speaking. Sometimes just watching. The captain exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. I find myself reaching for her in quiet moments. Like she's the answer to a question I haven't formed yet. Later. That night, Ellerek attempted to enter neurotrance for the first time since the immersion, but the moment he closed his eyes, she was there. No temple. No spiral. Just her. Closer than before. Not separate from his thoughts, but within them. His mental voice echoed with hers. He tried to recall a childhood memory, and she answered it. Tried to think in Valari syntax, and she completed the sentence. It wasn't possession. It wasn't even fusion. It was continuation. He broke trance and staggered from his quarters, pulse elevated. She hadn't taken control, she had always been there. In fragments. In dreams. In the long, generational silence between stars. Elorek wasn't becoming something new. He was remembering what he had always been. Block 10. The weight of knowing the days that followed were heavy with unspoken questions. Elorek moved through the corridors like a ghost tethered to his own thoughts. The crew's shared experience had forged something irrevocable, an unseen link, a burden. Captain Voss convened another meeting, this time with a different tone. We aren't alone in the galaxy. Nor are we alone in our minds, he began, voice steady but somber. Elorek's gaze scanned the room. Faces worn by sleepless nights and fragile hopes. We must prepare, Voss continued. Prepare for whatever is coming. The spiral isn't just a dream. It's a call. A test. A bridge. Elorek stepped forward, voice calm despite the turmoil within. We cannot fight what we do not understand. But we can learn. We can adapt. The crew nodded, some with reluctance, others with resolve. In his quarters, Elorek traced the spiral once more on his palm, now permanent in his memory if not on his skin. The heat from the mark lingered, less a warning now, more a promise. As the Icarian sailed deeper into the void, Elorek knew one truth above all: their voyage had become more than exploration. It was transformation, and there was no turning back. Block 11, echoes of the forgotten. In the days that followed, Elorek sought to understand the entity beyond the spiral. He scoured ancient texts stored in the Icarian's archives, fragments from long-lost civilizations, hints of similar phenomena recorded as myth or warning. One passage caught his eye, etched in a language as old as the stars, those who dream. The spiral awakened the past, and with it, the ancient echoes that never truly rest. He pondered the words late into the ship's artificial night. The spiral was more than a symbol. It was a key. A memory. A presence older than the Valari themselves. Elorek's dreams grew more vivid. Scenes of distant worlds, crumbled temples, and a vast ocean of stars where the spiral floated, radiating light and shadow. He realized the entity wasn't merely communicating. It was calling. The crew's transformation was just beginning. Block 12. Beyond the veil. The days blended into cycles as the crew grappled with the unseen force weaving through their minds. Elorek noticed subtle changes, not just in himself, but in the others. Voices, soft and distant, whispered just at the edge of awareness. Dreams no longer confined to sleep, but bleeding into waking moments. He caught Keswick staring at her own hands, tracing invisible patterns. Voss spoke less, his usual bravado replaced by a quiet contemplation. Elorek himself felt a growing restlessness, a hunger for something unnamed. The spiral's presence was no longer a mystery, it was a living thread, binding them all. One evening, as the Icarian drifted through the starfield, Elorek stood at the observation dome. He reached out, fingertips brushing the cold glassed eye and the endless void beyond. The spiral seemed to shimmer, an invitation, a promise. He whispered, almost to himself, whatever comes next, we face it together. Block 13, the unseen pull. The sensation of the spiral grew stronger every day. Elorek found it hard to focus on anything but the symbol that seemed to embed itself deeper into his consciousness. It was as if the spiral was not just a shape, but a force, drawing him, pulling the crew, pulling the ship itself closer to something unseen. Even those who hadn't participated in the immersion reported strange dreams, fractured glimpses of endless halls, voices calling in languages not spoken for millennia. One night, Elorek caught himself standing outside the ship's hull, staring into the void as if waiting for something to answer. His calm buzzed, "Captain, to all hands, mandatory briefing in 15 minutes." He turned, heart heavy with anticipation. The spiral was no longer just a mystery. It was becoming a destiny. Block 14, the gathering storm. The briefing room filled quickly. The air was thick with unspoken fears and questions that no one dared voice. Captain Voss stood at the front, his single eye scanning the crowd. "We have no answers," he began, "but we cannot ignore what's happening. This spiral, it's affecting every part of our ship, our minds, our very being. Ellerek stepped forward, his voice steady despite the weight of uncertainty. Resistance is futile. The spiral isn't an enemy, it's a transformation. We must embrace it if we want to survive. Murmurs rose and fell like waves. June raised his hand. And what if this transformation changes us into something unrecognizable? Something worse? Voss nodded solemnly. Then we face that too. Together. The crew exchanged looks, some hopeful, some fearful. Outside the ship, stars gleamed. Cold and indifferent, but inside, the spiral pulsed louder than ever. Block 15, dawn of the new path. The ship settled into an uneasy rhythm. Days passed with the spiral's influence weaving through every waking moment and every dream. Ellerek watched the crew change, not just in body or mind, but in spirit. They carried a weight, but also a strange peace. One evening, as the artificial stars blinked into existence, Ellerek stood beside Captain Voss at the observation dome. Do you think we'll ever be the same? Ellerek asked quietly. Voss looked out at the infinite darkness, then back at the faintly glowing spiral etched in Ellerek's palm. No, he said simply. But maybe that's not who we're meant to be anymore. A soft hum filled the ship. As if the Icarian itself was breathing with the spiral. Ellerek felt it too, hope and fear intertwined. The spiral was no longer just a mystery, it was their future.